When you picture a witch, what comes to mind? Probably a pointy hat, maybe some green skin, a bubbling cauldron, right? But that image, that's really just one tiny piece of a huge, complicated, and often really tragic story. For centuries, the witch was the ultimate villain. Someone working with the devil, someone who could ruin your crops, make your kids sick, and just tear a whole community apart. But where did that terrifying idea even come from? And what does it mean when someone calls themselves a witch today? All right, let's get into it.
So let's just start with the biggest question of all. What actually is a witch? And believe me, the answer is way more complex than you'd think. It's a word that has meant completely different things depending on where and when you were. It's been a label for the local healer, a demonic monster, and now, in our time, it's a spiritual path and a symbol of empowerment. So to really get it, we've got to peel back all those layers, starting way, way before the famous witch hunts ever began. Long before the witch became this figure of pure evil, magic was just a part of life. And the local person who practiced magic, they weren't someone to be scared of. Actually, they're the person you went to when you needed help. This is where we meet a character that flips that whole Halloween stereotype right on its head.
Yeah, in places like Britain, and all across Europe really, you had what were called cunning folk. You can think of them as the village problem solvers. They weren't evil, in fact they were usually respected. These were the people who used folk magic for totally practical, everyday stuff. Now, sometimes people called them white witches, but your average person knew there was a huge difference between the helpful magic of the cunning folk and the nasty stuff they thought a real witch did.
And this slide just lays it all out crystal clear. On one side, you've got the cunning person, the healer, the person who helps you. On the other side, you have the witch, the one who curses people and works with the devil. You wouldn't run from a cunning person, you'd run to them to break a curse you thought a witch put on you. See? One was the solution, the other was the problem. So, if everybody on the ground saw this clear difference, how in the world did the helpful healer and the evil sorcerer get all mixed up into one terrifying figure? Well, the answer comes from a huge shift in thinking, where the people in power started to see all magic, no matter how helpful, as something incredibly dark. You see, for the longest time, the church kind of just waved away witchcraft as silly superstition. But then this really dangerous idea started to take root with powerful theologians. The thinking went like this: if something supernatural happens and it's not a miracle from God, then it has to be the work of the devil. There was no middle ground. All of a sudden, using a folk charm to heal a sick animal was just as evil as cursing it. The lines got completely blurred, and anyone who used magic, even the helpful cunning folk, was suddenly under suspicion.
And this wasn't just some dusty theological debate. No, it was written down in 1487 in what might be one of the most dangerous books ever published, the Malleus Maleficarum, which means the Hammer of Witches. This thing was basically a witch hunter's instruction manual. It laid out in horrifying detail who witches were, the terrible things they did, we're talking cannibalism, flying, orgies with demons, and exactly how to prosecute them. This book cemented that new terrifying image of the witch across all of Europe.
So you've got this new demonic definition, you've got the guidebook on how to find them, and now the stage is set for one of the absolute darkest chapters in European history. This wasn't a theory anymore, this was about to have horrible, real-world consequences for tens of thousands of people.
Now, the witch trials went on for almost 400 years, but it wasn't a constant, non-stop terror. It was more like a fire that would flare up in different places at different times. You can see here that the period between, say, 1560 and 1630 was the absolute worst. This was a time of incredible stress. You had religious wars, climate change causing famines, economic chaos, and witches became the perfect scapegoat for a world that just felt like it was spinning out of control.
The scale of it is just mind-boggling. Across Europe and over in the American colonies, about 100,000 people were officially prosecuted for the crime of witchcraft. And these weren't just lynch mobs. No, these were legal proceedings with the full power of the church and the government behind them.
And the end result was so often death. Historians figure somewhere between 40 and 60,000 people were executed. Think about that. Tens of thousands of people killed based on accusations of impossible crimes that often started with nothing more than a personal grudge or a bad harvest.
So who were these victims? Well, the stereotype of the witch is a woman, and the numbers definitely show that. About 80% of the people executed were women, especially those who were kind of on the edges of society. Older women, poor women, widows. But, and this is so important, men were accused and killed too. In some regions like Iceland, men were actually the majority of the accused. Absolutely no one was completely safe.
So how did the numbers get so terrifyingly high? Well, a huge reason was the official use of torture. Back in 1468, the Pope basically said that witchcraft was an exceptional crime, which meant all the normal rules for interrogation were thrown out the window. Under unimaginable pain, people would confess to literally anything, and, most importantly, they would name other people. This created this horrifying chain reaction where one accusation could spiral out and destroy an entire community.
The official trials finally petered out in the 1700s, but the idea of the witch, that never went away. And then, in the 20th century, something incredible happened. The word witch, a word that was once a death sentence, was taken back. It was reclaimed and totally transformed into something about identity and spirituality and power.
This big shift is often part of a wider spiritual movement called modern paganism, or neo-paganism. Now, it's really important to get this straight. This is a modern religious movement. While it's inspired by ancient beliefs, it's not some unbroken ancient tradition. It's about people, today, finding new ways to connect with what they see as older, nature-based spiritual paths.
And for someone today who calls themselves a witch, their beliefs are the complete opposite of everything in that evil Hammer of Witches book. It's a spiritual path focused on nature and yourself, not making a deal with Satan. Any magic that's practiced is usually for things like healing or personal growth. And maybe, most importantly, the witch has become this powerful feminist symbol, a figure of resistance against oppression, reclaiming an identity that was once used to abuse and kill women.
It's really tempting to look at all this and think of witch hunts as something from a dark, distant past, a terrible chapter of history that thank goodness we're done with. But the awful truth is, for many, many people around the world, the hunt is still terrifyingly real.
Right now, today, in countries all over the world, people, and again, it's very often women and children, are being accused of witchcraft. They're being subjected to horrible violence, they're cast out of their homes, and they are even murdered. In Saudi Arabia, it's still a crime that is punishable by death. So let's be perfectly clear, this is not just history. The same deadly combination of fear and social pressure is still costing people their lives.
So why? Why does this keep happening? The Salem Witch Museum boils it down to this terrifyingly simple formula. It's like a recipe for disaster. You start with a foundation of fear, a general anxiety in society, maybe about the economy or social change, whatever. Then something happens, a trigger. It could be a pandemic, a natural disaster, a political crisis. That trigger lights the fuse, and it creates this desperate need for a scapegoat, someone to blame. If you can just punish that person or that group, then it feels like you've solved the problem and everything can go back to normal.
And that brings us to our final, and maybe most uncomfortable question. The historical witch was a very specific kind of scapegoat. But that formula for creating one, that's timeless. It's a social weapon that can be aimed at any group at any time. So if you look at our world right now, with all of our own fears and our own triggers, you have to ask yourself, who are we being told to fear? Who is being set up as the scapegoat? Who is the witch today?